My name is Ethan Ward. I work as a park ranger in northern Washington. Most people think my job is quiet, peaceful, trees, trails, wildlife, fresh air. But night shift is different. At night, the forest doesn't feel empty. It feels alert. I spend most of my hours alone in a wooden ranger cabin, watching tree lines blur into darkness, listening to my radio crackle with static, counting the minutes until sunrise like it actually means something. There's something visitors never understand about forests like this. They don't just exist, they observe, they listen, and they remember patterns. That's why rangers here are taught certain rules we're never supposed to write down. The most important one is simple. If you ever hear 3 knocks on your cabin door after midnight, do not answer, do not speak, do not look through the window, because that sound is never the wind, and whatever makes it already knows you're inside. Being a park ranger isn't heroic. It's paperwork, broken fences, lost hikers who swear the trail moved while they weren't looking. Most nights, I sit alone in a one-room cabin built sometime in the 70s. It smells like old wood, dust, and burnt coffee. There's a wood stove in the corner that pops too loud when the temperature drops, a metal desk bolted to the floor, and a radio. Older than me that never fully goes quiet. I keep a patrol log on that desk. Weather, foot traffic, wildlife sightings. Anything out of the ordinary gets written down, even if it doesn't make sense yet. That's the culture. We don't chase legends. We don't tell ghost stories. We document. The forest stretches for miles in every direction around my post. No cell service, no nearby towns, no streetlights. At night, the dark doesn't sit still out there. It presses in from the tree line like it's trying to remember where the cabin ends and the woods begin. Most rangers learn quickly that silence in a forest isn't real silence. There's always something moving, something breathing, something cracking a branch just far enough away to keep you guessing. You get used to it. You have to. There's a saying passed down between older rangers. They never put it in training manuals. If the forest feels wrong, it probably is. The first night that feeling settled in my gut, nothing dramatic happened. No screams. No shadows sprinting between trees, just a small thing. I was filling out my log when the motion light outside the cabin clicked on. That light is sensitive, too sensitive. Snow sets it off. Owls set it off. Heavy rain sets it off. So I waited. I listened. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the window. The beam cut across the clearing in front of the cabin. No animals, no footprints, no wind moving the branches. The light stayed on. Darkness stood just beyond its edge, thick and unmoving, exactly where the trees stopped. Not retreating, not advancing, just waiting. I told myself it was faulty wiring. That cabin was older than half the rangers on payroll. Still, I wrote it down. Motion light activated. No visible cause. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, the radio crackled. Not static, not interference. Breathing. Slow. Controlled. I leaned closer, finger hovering over the transmit button. Then, the sound stopped. Dead air. I sat back and laughed quietly to myself. Fatigue does strange things to the brain. Everyone knows that. That's what I wrote in the log. Possible radio malfunction. I finished my coffee an hour later. It had gone cold without me noticing. Outside, the motion light flicked off. The clearing disappeared, and for the first time since taking this post, I realized I couldn't remember the forest ever feeling so close to the cabin before. Not surrounding it, watching it. Rangers don't panic. Panic gets people killed. That's drilled into us early, long before we're trusted with night shifts or solo posts. You assess, you document, you move on. So when I found footprints near the tree line the next morning, I didn't freeze. They were close to the cabin. Too close. Barefoot footprints, no tread, no heel marks, just smooth impressions pressed into damp soil like something had stepped down carefully and wanted to leave as little trace as possible. I crouched beside them and told myself it was a prank. A hiker trying to be funny. Someone bored. Someone stupid. That explanation fit well enough to breathe again. I measured the prints anyway, wrote down the spacing, noted how the toes were slightly too long, too evenly spaced. Still, I wrote the word human in my log, because sometimes labeling something makes it easier to control. By midday, the smell started. It crept in through the cabin vents while I was checking equipment. Not rot, not decay, something damp, heavy, like wet leaves mixed with old pennies. Metallic. I opened the windows, blaming stagnant air. The smell didn't leave, it just thinned, like it didn't want to be noticed. I walked the perimeter that afternoon, checked fences, replaced a damaged trail marker. The forest felt normal enough during daylight. Birds, wind, insects humming like static in the background of the world. Still, I kept feeling watched, not stared at, observed. The difference matters. That night, the radio started acting up again. At first, it was just interference, short bursts, clicks, a hiss that came and went. Then, between two bursts of static, I heard breathing. Not loud, not panicked, slow, steady, like someone standing still, inches from a microphone, making sure they were heard. I tapped the radio casing, adjusted the volume. "Old wirin'," I muttered out loud. Saying it made it feel official. The breathing stopped. I logged it. I logged everything. That's what rangers do when something doesn't make sense. Later, while making another pot of coffee, I heard my name. Ethan. It came from outside the cabin. Soft, careful. The voice sounded wrong. Not distorted, not aggressive. Just flat. Like someone who knew how my name was supposed to sound but didn't understand what usually came with it. Concern. Urgency. Familiarity. I didn't answer. I stood still, hand resting on the counter, and told myself it was exhaustion. Long shifts mess with perception. Everyone knows that. The voice didn't repeat my name. That bothered me more than if it had. Around midnight, I stepped outside to check the generator. Cold air hit my lungs hard. The smell was stronger out there. Wet, metallic. The footprints were back. More of them now. They circled the cabin at a distance, never crossing into the clearing fully. Like something pacing, thinking. I forced myself to breathe, slowly. Forced myself not to rush. Panic gets people killed. I reminded myself of that as I went back inside and locked the door. That was when the knocking started. 3 knocks, slow, even, perfectly spaced, not loud, polite. I froze, because exhaustion doesn't knock, and it doesn't knock 3 times in perfect rhythm. I turned off the lights without thinking, sat in the dark, holding my breath. The knocking didn't come again, but something brushed against the side of the cabin. Not scratching, listening. I stayed there until sunrise, didn't sleep, didn't move. When morning came, I wrote everything down, every detail, every smell, every sound. Because deep down, past the training and the rational explanations, I knew something important. Whatever was out there was learning how I reacted, and it was patient enough to wait for me to make a mistake. The rules weren't official, they weren't printed, They weren't laminated. They didn't come with signatures or approval stamps. They were carved, scratched deep into the inside of a dented metal locker in the ranger station's storage room. The kind of locker no one used anymore. The kind you walked past every day without noticing. I only found them because I was looking for replacement batteries. The locker door groaned when I pulled it open. Rust flaked onto the concrete floor. And there they were. Rules, some written in pen, some in marker. Most carved with something sharp and impatient. Names were scratched out so hard the metal bent inward. Dates were circled in red ink. Again and again. Several lines ended with the same phrase. Learned the hard way. That was when I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. This forest didn't attack randomly. It didn't lash out. It didn't hunt blindly. It waited, and it punished mistakes. Rule 1. If you hear knocking after midnight, turn off all lights. The rule was written 3 times, once neatly, once shakily, and once so deep it cut through the paint. I learned why on my 3rd night after finding the locker. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps on the cabin door. I killed the lights immediately. The cabin fell into darkness so complete it felt physical, like something heavy had dropped over my head. I held my breath. The doorknob turned, slowly, testing. A shape blocked the thin line of moonlight under the door. Tall. Too tall. It didn't enter. It waited. After a long minute, the shape moved away. In the morning, I found scratch marks on the door frame. At eye level. I wrote the rule again in my notebook. Rule 2. Never respond to voices that know your name. This one had notes beside it. Different handwriting. Different ink. Sounds right. Uses your tone. Tries again later. I heard it the following evening while checking trail cameras. Ethan. The voice came from behind me. Close. Too close. I didn't turn around. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. Ethan, it said again. Same voice. Same cadence. No emotion. I walked back to the cabin without answering. Behind me, footsteps matched my pace. They stopped when I reached the light. I didn't look back. Rule 3. If something stands between trees and light, do not shine a flashlight at it. Someone had drawn a crude diagram under this rule. A circle, a line, a shape between them. The explanation was simple. Light teaches its shape. I broke this rule without realizing it. One night I saw movement near the tree line. Just a silhouette. I raised my flashlight. The beam hit something that didn't reflect properly, like skin stretched too tight over the wrong frame. It stepped back immediately, too quickly. The next morning, the footprints were clearer, more defined, as if it had learned how feet were supposed to look. Rule 4. If you break a rule, don't run. This rule was underlined repeatedly. Running tells it you're prey. A ranger named Collins had written beneath it, walk, breathe, act normal. Collins's name was scratched out. I found his badge buried near the old fire road 2 days later. Rule 5. If you smell metal, it's already close. No notes, no explanation. Just a date, circled twice. That night, the smell filled the cabin. Wet, coppery. I stayed still until it faded. Rule 6. Never invited inside. Even as a joke, someone had added, it understands permission. Rule 7. If it mimics someone you know, they're already gone. This rule wasn't carved, it was written in dried blood. I stopped reading after that, because the radio turned on by itself, and a familiar voice said, Ethan, open the door. I followed the rules after that. I followed them exactly, because every violation I found in that locker ended with the same result, a name. a date, and silence. It wasn't me who broke the rules. I need to make that clear. I followed them. Every line, every warning. It was a seasonal ranger, new guy, early 20s, college patch still stitched to his jacket. His name was Mark. Mark laughed when I told him about the rules. Not cruel laughter, nervous laughter, the kind people use when they don't want to believe something, but also don't know how to argue against it. He said all forests feel creepy at night, said isolation messes with your head, said stories like that spread because people need explanations for fear. I didn't push him. Rangers don't force belief. We document. The first mistake Mark made was small. He answered the radio when it shouldn't have been answered. The voice on the other end sounded like dispatch, but slightly off. Too slow. Mark acknowledged it anyway. I wrote it down. The second mistake came 2 nights later. We were both in the station that night, working separate sections of the forest. Around 12:17 a.m., the motion light outside the cabin snapped on. I didn't need to look outside to know. The smell came with it. Wet, metallic, copper and rain-soaked leaves. I killed the lights, sat still. That's when I heard Mark's voice on the radio. "Ethan," he said, "you messin' with me?" I didn't answer. My heart was beating too fast for that. The radio crackled again. "I think there's someone outside," Mark said. "Someone's knocking." 3 knocks echoed faintly through the open channel. Even through the radio, I could hear the rhythm. Slow, even, too deliberate. I whispered into the transmitter, "Don't open the door." There was a pause. Then Mark laughed. "Dude," he said, "it's probably a hiker, or you." The third mistake happened right after that. The knocking grew louder, not on my cabin, on his. I could hear it through the radio feed. 3 knocks, right against the microphone. I told him to turn off the lights, to stay quiet, to wait. He didn't. I heard footsteps, a door handle turning, and then silence. Not static, silence. I stood up without realizing it, hands shaking. I kept the lights off, kept breathing slow. Minutes passed, then the radio came back on. Not Mark's voice, something else. It breathed into the microphone, slow, satisfied. Then footsteps, walking away, heavy, measured, on 2 legs. But the rhythm was wrong, too even, too careful, like it was practicing. At dawn, I broke protocol. I went to Mark's cabin. The door was open, the lights were still on. The inside looked untouched. Coffee on the counter, jacket on the chair, no blood, no struggle, just muddy footprints leading out the back, barefoot. They stopped at the tree line. I followed the rules after that, because the forest had taken something, and it had done it without rushing, without noise, without leaving proof. It didn't need to. It knew I understood now. I filed the report the way we're supposed to. Date, time, location, weather conditions, last known contact, search radius. I wrote Mark's name in clean, professional letters and tried not to think about how fast a person can disappear when the trees decide to keep their secrets. The supervisors came up the next day. 2 trucks, 4 rangers, a deputy from the county. They walked the clearing, photographed the footprints, measured the distance to the tree line. One of them asked me if Mark had been drinking. Another asked if we'd argued. The deputy asked if we had any dangerous wildlife in the area. I answered calmly, "That's what rangers do. We speak in facts. We don't sound dramatic." But when they stepped into the woods, the radio on the table crackled without anyone touching it. A single breath, slow, close. Every head turned. And then It stopped. The deputy frowned, like he'd heard enough weird things in his life to recognize another one. No one said anything. No one wrote it down. They searched for 2 days. They found Mark's flashlight, smashed near the fire road. They found his boot prints ending in the mud like he'd stopped walking mid-step. They found a strip of cloth from his jacket caught on a branch, twisting in the wind like a small surrender flag. But they didn't find Mark. The official conclusion was simple. Missing in rugged terrain. That phrase shows up in reports all the time. It sounds tidy. It gives people a box to place grief inside. After the search team left, I stayed. I told myself it was duty, that the park needed coverage, that visitors needed someone to keep them safe. But the truth was uglier. I stayed because leaving felt like breaking another rule I hadn't found yet. The locker door in the storage room still had fresh scratches on it. New lines, new marks, as if someone had returned after Mark, as if the rules were still being updated. I added one myself with a utility knife. If a new ranger laughs at the rules, do not laugh with them, because laughter is an invitation. And in a place like this, invitations matter. I started sleeping during daylight, short naps, never deep. At night, I kept the lights off as much as possible. I stopped making coffee after midnight. I stopped opening the curtains. I stopped standing in the center of the room. I learned to sit with my back against the wall like an animal. Some nights, nothing happened. Those were the worst, because silence makes you hope, and hope makes you careless. Then the small things returned. The metallic smell drifting through the vents, footprints appearing where no one had walked, a trail camera catching a single frame of movement that looked like a person at first glance, until you noticed the proportions were wrong. Too long, too still. Once, I heard Mark's voice on the radio, not screaming, not pleading, just casual, like he was calling in a weather update. "Ethan," he said, "you can open the door now." I turned the radio off and wrote another line in the log. Voice mimicry escalating. That's what we call it when we don't want to write the truth. Weeks passed. People came and went. Day hikers, families, couples taking photos at the viewpoint. They laughed in the sunlight. They threw snack wrappers into trash cans. They waved at my truck like I was part of the scenery. None of them knew what happened once the sun dropped behind the ridgeline. None of them could feel the way the forest changed its posture, the way it listened. Last night, I did what I always do before locking up. I checked the generator, secured the doors, logged the weather, tuned the radio until the static felt steady. Then I stepped outside to latch the cabin. The air was cold and perfectly still. No wind, no insects, no distant owl calls, just my breath. I turned the key. The lock clicked, and behind me, in the darkness where the trees began, I heard 3 knocks. Not on the door, on wood, close enough to feel in my ribs. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I didn't turn around. I kept my hand on the lock, kept my eyes forward, kept my breathing shallow, because the forest doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive curiosity. I'm still a park ranger. I still work the night shift. I still follow the rules. And if you ever find yourself alone in a cabin with the trees pressed close, remember this. When you hear 3 knocks after midnight, it isn't the wind. It's the forest asking if you've learned,